Well, welcome everybody. Those of you who are here in person in our Zoom space, as well as anyone who may be following us as we stream online and or uh, following the Twitter hashtag of Creating a Future. And it is December 14th, and this is the Creating the Future board meeting for December. So welcome everybody, and certainly for anyone who might be new to this, if you are watching, or even if you are watching this after the fact, we encourage folks to tweet so that we hear voices and are engaged in the conversations that we are having. So just to get us started, I'd like to do a quick go around of folks, what your name is, what you like to be called, where you are, and we generally like to start with just, something that everyone experiences everywhere, which is weather. So what's the weather like where you are? And I'll start. So I'm Justin Pollack. I go by Justin. And I am in Washington, D.C., where it is now cold and rainy after being glorious, sunny, and 60 yesterday. So it's kind of a gloomy Monday. And I'll pass it over to Angie. How about if you can?
Okay, yeah, let's popcorn this thing. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. I'm Angie Eichenberry. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska, where it's actually sunny, but everything's covered in snow, so it's really bright outside right now, and lovely, and hopefully I'll get out later on today. Let's see, is there anything else I'm supposed to say right now, Justin? I go by Angie, and my pronouns are she, hers. And I'm popcorning it to Kathy.
Oh, hi, I'm Kathy Springsteen. I'm actually in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It is very gloomy and overcast, but that's pretty much what December usually looks like here anyway. We did have some snow on the ground, but it melted within an hour after it landed. And we're expecting a little bit more tomorrow. It's in the 30s, but it's nice for us. And I'm gonna popcorn it over to Beatrice.
Thank you, Kathy. This is Beatrice Paniagovica. I go by Beatrice or Beatriz, whatever it's easier for you, or even B. I'm right now in Valencia, Spain, where I'm from and where my family lives, but I do live in DC, just like you, Justin. It's been also glorious here this weekend, but right now it's a little bit colder and it's already dark. It's 7 p.m. So yeah, I cannot enjoy the sun at the moment. I'm passing it to Hildy.
Hi there, I am Hildy Gottlieb, and I'm in Tucson, Arizona, where it's cold for us. And I know that doesn't mean cold for any normal humans. We are going to get down close to freezing tonight. We're actually going to go cover the garden, so we'll get down to freezing. But because the desert is so dry, there's sometimes a 30 to 40 degree differential Fahrenheit during the day. So we'll start at freezing, and by today we'll be at 60, 65, which is about 15 Celsius. So so yeah, that's where we are. It's sort of a little bit gray, a little bit blue, but yeah, we're happily in winter where it's not a million degrees. I will send this over to Carl.
Hi everyone, I'm Carl Wilding. I go by the name of Carl, unless you're my kids, in which case I'm old man. I'm in just outside London in the UK, a place called St Albans. So right now it's 6 p.m. in the evening, so it's quite cold, dark, and it's raining. Good to see you all. Vu, over to you.
Hi everyone, this is Vu. I am in Seattle right now, and we're approaching winter. So it's raining, been raining for a while. That's what we got. Eli, hi.
Hey, Boo. Hey, everyone. Sorry I'm a little late. Reporting from Alameda, California. Sky seems to be relatively blue. Had a great weekend. Happy to be here to see how we can create the bright and beautiful future.
So I guess I'm going to caboose this and come up following everybody else. I'm Dimitri Petropoulos, go by Dimitri, in usually sunny, and it's pretty sunny, Tucson, Arizona. Heather was talking about the temperature swings. It's 68, just about Fahrenheit, 20 centigrade right now, to give you an idea. And if I go outside, I'm a little chilly. So just to show you how our blood has completely thinned out, but we can take 110 during the summer. So that's the trade-off. Back to you, Justin.
Great, thank you everybody. And again, Vu and Eli, welcome. You popped in sort of after we kicked things off going here. At Creating the Future, we are deeply human, which is great because we're all people here, and we like to connect and find out sort of what it is that's keeping us human and inspiring us in these days. So just briefly, if folks would like to share something that is awesome, inspiring, exciting, or just like on your brain, that would be great. And so I'm going to try this properly. Beatrice, is that okay?
Perfecto. Thank you, Justin. Yes, right before this call, I was connecting with a colleague that, of course, I haven't seen in months since we've been working from home, and we were just saying how much we need that human connection, right? That at the end we are social beings and we need to connect. So we are already making plans to meet in at the National Mall when I go back to DC in January, because it does feel great to connect with your colleagues at a deeper level than not just work.
Whom else is feeling inspired? And really, Beatrice, I just wanted to practice. That was why I called you out.
That's good with me.
Are you coming back to DC like for real, or are you just coming to visit, or?
For real.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's
gonna be a challenge because I've been here for 3 months, and that connection that I've been missing, right, with family and friends from here. Now going back to DC, my mom was asking me, but you have people there, right, that you can be in touch with and connect. And I'm like, yeah, no worries, have great friends. But still, I know it's gonna be hard. So I hope that the rainy weather and cloudiness leaves by the time I get there. So at least the sun helps.
Wonderful.
So Carl, did I see your hand pop up there for a second?
You did. I got two awesomes in my life, a personal one and sort of a work one. So the personal one is that some of you know my son went away to university this year for his first year, and we've all been missing him. And he's back for Christmas. And touch wood, didn't bring COVID with him, so that's quite nice. And then the one that is a sort of a bit of a blend between personal and private, I guess, is that I've just put in the chat a link to something called the Baobab Foundation, which I've been involved in terms of helping to birth from just a bit of an idea that we've had to something that I think is going somewhere, and partly inspired by Vu's ideas and Vu's challenge about foundations and how they fund. And this is about trying to fund Black and minoritized ethnic communities and the organizations that work amongst them. This is about sort of, you know, that sort of thing. If I think you shared it with me before, who's the I can't remember, someone who's American that basically said, you know, if you want to sort of do something that sort of changes the world, just don't try and change the system that sort of is there. Sort of go around it and invent something new that makes the current one irrelevant. And I think that's what we're trying to do with the Baobab Foundation, because we're trying to come up with a new way of funding organizations that's by communities of and for them, and tries to move on from some of those things that foundations have not done well in previous years. So even though I've played a tiny part, I feel very proud to have been associated with it. So have a look in the chat. I'm very proud of that.
Wonderful. I It's really exciting.
What else is inspiring folks?
I will go. I am always inspired by the holidays. I love, it gives me a chance to make things and wrap things and make things pretty. And so I'm just feeling inspired by the holidays and by giving. And it's been nice to be sending gifts to our kids for Hanukkah and seeing them on FaceTime so that at least we can connect. And so, yeah, I'm always happy when it's this time of year.
Thank you. Yeah, Kathy.
Well, I have, the thing I'm most inspired about is that my 82-year-old mother is still amongst us. We nearly lost her about a year ago. She had a stroke and she's making an incredible recovery, but she taught me how to knit about 10 years ago. She struggled with it, but she finally taught me how to knit. And when the birth of my new grandson happened a year ago, she was going to knit the family holiday stocking for him. Every one of us, all of my mother's children and her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren now, each have their own unique named stocking with its own pattern on it, and that she has knit. There's no embroidery. Everything is stitch by stitch. My partner likes to refer to it as knitted tapestry. And when she had her stroke this year, she lost her sight. And so I was asked to pick up the task and go with it. So I just completed 2 stockings, one for my brand new grandson and one for my brand new son-in-law, who was suddenly, after marriage, a dad. So that's my inspiration. It's going to be a good holiday season.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
So related to the holiday, I guess. So as Hildy alluded, now is the time of Hanukkah. We are in the 5th day. And for those who may not be that familiar, Hanukkah is a minor Jewish holiday, even though it gets sort of blown up into a large one. But it is about sort of things going on longer than you expected. There is oftentimes in terms of, they frame it in terms of miracles, but so I guess there's this part of me that's like, well, there is certainly a hope that more vaccine gets to more people faster than we thought. Perhaps 8 times faster would be wonderful as we start to look at that. And so that's sort of the grand scheme. The personal awesome for me is that it was probably, I don't know, somewhere back in the spring where I talked about wanting to be able to start getting some writing done, and finally some of it started to happen. So I was happy about that in the last couple weeks. So that was good.
That is awesome.
2 awesomes, and I had been thinking about this, Justin, and you touched upon it. Not Jewish officially, sort of by association, have been around Hanukkah for a long time and have been, now am participating full steam in Hanukkah. And one of the things that I realized about it, which is kind of interesting as opposed to having grown up with Christmas all the time, where you have this sort of dump of presents that shows up, on one day. The idea that you go day by day, and even though it doesn't matter what the present is, that there's a pause and that you get to think about it. And then you get to look forward to the next day. And then you get to look forward to the next day. So I find that really kind of inspiring and neat, and a wonderful way to honor, because that's what the gifts are, is honoring the people you love and doing whatever. And second awesome involves my youngest, who is an actor and got his first part in a big movie. He's been in some, interestingly forgettable stuff, but that's what actors do. And he's in the movie Mank, which just came out on Netflix. He has a very small part, but it is a speaking part. So we, on the day came out on Saturday, or Friday or Saturday of last week, we kind of got together as a family and watched independently, sort of at the same time. And then afterwards, we got to sort of check in and say, wow, that was great, that was wonderful, whatever. So that was pretty awesome to, even though we are apart, we still got to be together. So that's my awesome.
Wow.
Hey everyone, this is Vu. My awesome is my kids seem to be doing okay with virtual schooling. I'm just really grateful for the educators who've just been so flexible and responsive. I think they're working a little too hard though, because they're always responding even on the weekends, and it's a little scary. Kids are doing great. Also, I got this massage chair pad, because you can't get massages anymore, and I was like, I got this thing. So it's working right now while I'm talking to you. So I might be less angry on this phone call. So
Angie or Eli?
It's my turn. I'll say two, or I have so many awesomes actually right now. It's graduation time. So we're, it's the best time of the semester. Of course, there's grading too happening. I will set that aside, but we're excited that we have 3 of our PhD students who are graduating this year, including one of our students who, Dale Gines, who works for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, and he's been working on his PhD dissertation for a long time now, but he's graduating, and he's going to be the marshal for graduation. So that's really exciting. So, it's just a joyous time to celebrate our students. Even if we can't get together, we're doing a virtual graduation celebration. And I get to put together this video, the memories of the, and so it's really nice time. And then I'm very excited. I want to get, too partisan, but today is, we have Precious McKesson, the first woman of color in the state to go cast an electoral vote today. So she's going to be there right now in about an hour in the state capitol. And so it's just really inspiring. She's just an amazing leader, and I'm hopeful.
All right, I guess I'll go next. So many wonderful things happening for everyone. So my awesome actually is going to this group meeting that I went to last week. It's called the Social Impact Advisory Group. And there I met someone, Solomon Barrett, and he knows Hildy pretty well. And she spoke at one of his events. That was kind of a cool thing to see all these interconnections in this world. And I met someone there named James Burke, who is in Seattle. He's a former Microsoft engineer who helps nonprofits with their tech. So we had a really good call today. One of his passions is the Mars Foundation. And he's been doing this since 1998. And they're talking about how, there's a place in Utah, which is a Mars simulation place, where they basically kind of like simulate being on Mars. And they're flying drones and mapping the terrain and kind of growing algae in like big containers. Super interesting stuff. The moon has a lot of water, and they're going to be using possibly creating a lunar gateway to basically be a launch pad for the space exploration. And I believe water can be used as rocket fuel. So I learned all these cool things today in this kind of conversation about how, there's so much abundance throughout space of metals, of all the things we sometimes struggle to find on the Earth. And it's a matter of time before, we see a lot of maybe less of this fighting for limited metals. So that was giving me some hope and reminded me of collective enoughness. Everything in our galaxy, it's all there. So that's my awesome for today.
You were just my awesome. So.
That's very cool.
That's
very nice to end on.
That is magnificent. That's the sort of geeky stuff that Dimitri's going to be like looking into. I can just see the minute we get offline. Just wait until the meeting's over, Dimitri.
We'll talk later.
Absolutely. He's a great guy. So approachable, so kind, and just, wants to really share and help to move all of us forward.
Wow. Wow. Justin, if it's okay, I'd like to take just a moment, because I know Eli has been with us before and Kathy's been sort of with us in the background, but I'd like to introduce Kathy and Beatrice, if I could just take a second to do that. Kathy joined us virtually, watching quietly last time, and has added so much to this conversation. It's been one of those delightful things that happens when we open the doors and folks we've never met before just walk in. And that's why we did it. And it's just, we're so pleased that you joined us on screen, Kathy. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Look forward to your input. Beatrice and I met, it's 3 years ago now. Wow, wow. When I was in Florida, and this enchanting woman approached me during one of the breaks, and we just started talking, and we just clicked and connected. We've stayed connected since then, which has been just delightful. Beatrice has since moved from Florida to work on in communications for, and remind me, Beatrice, they've changed the name, so I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, it's Unidos US, the former NCLR.
There we go. Yes, and has been helpful in our own communications work. Was participating in our strategy meetings last fall. Has been helpful as helping me bounce some ideas around, and so I'm thrilled to have you here. I'm just always thrilled to have you here, and Eli as well. Eli, what was fun was that Solomon happened to be at the event where I met you, and so there's all sorts of wonderful connections, and so it just feels really good to have all of you here. And for anyone who is potentially watching, please tweet to the hashtag Creating the Future. I know sometimes it's hard to wrap your head around stuff and get it out in 140 characters. Please feel free to make comments at the blog afterwards, which is what Kathy did last time, and we just absorbed it. So so please join in. We love having all of the voices.
I'm watching the tweet stream, so if folks are tweeting, we can incorporate it in real time. If you are comfortable doing it that way, or commenting, or adding, or questioning, just rest assured we're keeping an eye on it. And we're going to try to do our best to incorporate it in the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Dimitri. Well, thank you, everybody, for sharing. Welcome to, everybody. I think on my screen, we make the perfect Brady Bunch pattern where we are exactly however many number that is. I guess that's 9 that's there. So, so for those of you who are new, who may be watching this, one of the characteristics of Creating the Future is we build the house while we live in it. And I use that analogy instead of building the plane while we fly it, because to me, planes always require infusions of more and more and more. For it to fly, you have to suck up fuel. And so I don't know why we're striving to build planes when what we could really use are houses that once we begin to establish them, we can thrive in them without having to suck fuel. So that's my little diatribe there for or soapbox. But today there are kind of 2.5, maybe 3 things, depending on the time that we have today, that in the vein of that notion of both building the house and living in the house. And so one of the key things that we've talked about is this board serving as an integrity board, which really speaks to, are the things that are happening in the ecosystem that Creating the Future is involved with, both reflecting our values and being done in a way that reflects the core element of Creating the Future, which is catalytic thinking. And so part of what we want to do today is we've been having the ongoing conversation around the values. Again, Kathy, thank you for some input. Hildy shared some other feedback that we were getting. So In my notes, I had sort of flagged this as calling it values confirmation. They will never be finalized, but I think we need to confirm something that we are comfortable. And basically the question I used, and sometimes I use these kind of brainy, wordy questions, but in what ways do we wish to incorporate the feedback and or adapt any of the current values articulation, meaning the documents that we've written or things on the website, in order to establish our own comfort and competence with the values that we're going to be applying moving forward. So again, sort of this recognition, and Carl, I think you mentioned this last time, that it's always a work in progress. So what we need is just something that we're feeling comfortable, that it captures the essence and with the recognition that it will probably tweak and change, as new movements, new ideas, new understandings of people present themselves. So that's sort of the first piece up. And then the living in the house is actually, we have a proposed communication strategy. And so asking questions about whether we as this entity that's representing the nexus of what we're calling a board right now, of which every voice is a part of that. I want to honor every voice, is really asking, given what we know about this strategy and how it was conducted, do we feel that it's falling in line with our values? That's what our job has been. So we get to sort of really flex that muscle for one of the first times there. And then depending on where we are with time, we certainly have this ongoing question around board recruitment and kind of asking the question of, that was one that came up, gosh, when we started this 3 years ago, that first sort of question of recruiting the board, which took us in a very interesting path. But coming back to that question of, well, what's the experience that we want for someone who would be serving on the board? That was the question I was thinking of putting out there, so that we could come to thinking about it not as what are we going to do, but what's the experience we want to invite people into, or that we want people to have if they step in. So that's what I had. Certainly, if there are other things that people are curious about or want to raise. I don't know, Hildy and Dimitri, are we hitting on sort of the pieces that you need from this consideration? Okay, got a thumbs up there. So I'll just go back to the values piece and kind of just open that up again of reflections that folks have had, or observations or requests about our values statement so far.
I can share what I have been hearing from folks as we've been asking the question, because we posted at the eJournal, we've posted in our online groups, we've been sort of generating conversation. Some people commented at the blog, some people are commenting wherever that is on social media. And so aggregating all of that has been a job in and of itself. The overwhelming sentiment is, this is something that would make me want to get involved. That the statement alone would make people want to get involved. And that just felt really, really good. There was one question that was raised by several people, but the overwhelming majority, and we can talk about the question after everyone else has a chance to sort of pipe in a little bit, but the overwhelming sentiment was remarkably, I loved the fact that it was, this would make me want to get involved. I'm not sure if everyone else has had a chance to noodle it, because I know I tend to think slow. I need to think about things. So I'd love to hear what others experienced.
The others. Well, I did want to acknowledge, Kathy, your comments about sort of expanding just how we were framing things around everyone's health and all, and I really did appreciate that sort of, that we value healthy people, and it's all people and our planet, really sort of acknowledging that. And I really appreciate that. Sort of, it seems a little nuanced, but I think it really was nice to kind of land that.
And I appreciate you doing it because it is a nuanced thing. Yeah, we don't tend to think a lot about the difficulties that some people have that we just take for granted. Even in the disabled community, we don't think about things like that. We try to. So I do appreciate that very much. I have a tendency to wait until everybody else has had their speak before I jump in or offer to jump in. But since we had so much quiet going on, again, thank you for letting me be a part of this. I have been following this group since 2015, and I get a slow start too. I did want to say that I read through and absorbed the value statement that was produced, and I passed it on to my very quiet group of colleagues that I work with. We are all loving it. It says, I think, what it needs to say, and obviously, like you said, Justin and Hildy, things are going to change as they change. We can't stay static. So I think this is one of the best starts I've seen, and I'm thrilled with it the way it is.
Yeah, Carl.
This may sound like a very sort of small and silly thing, but what I like about it is literally the framing of it, the way that the value statement reads, we value X. Because so many organizations talk about what they don't like and what they're against and how everything is bad. And these are all the bad things that we're trying to stop. And I don't know, maybe I'm just at a point in my life where I like people that talk about there's a better way of doing things. And I think what a lot of people are looking for right now, actually, amidst the gloom and so on, is that people want a bit of hope and they want a bit of agency. And what I like about how the values are framed is that I think they give people agency. So yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah, I agree with what you just said, Carl. And for me, it resonates a lot, is bringing the people who are dealing with the issues that we're trying to fix, having that voice of the people who are struggling with whatever system that we want to change. I always feel that I don't belong in many rooms just because I haven't had the experience that some people have had. And I don't want to speak for anyone. I only know my own experience and how I live it. And I appreciate so much having that as a center value, as well as the collective enoughness. For me, it just always resonates so much. So definitely this is, I've been in awe with creating the future from the beginning and reading the values statement. It just keeps on wanting to, for me to keep on coming back and getting more and more involved.
The only comment that I heard from folks, it was 3 people, and it was a small piece. Let me bring it up on the screen. And it was this right here.
Oh,
Oh, did it not work?
no, it just took down. You're highlighting it.
Is it not visible?
I can see.
Okay.
We're good.
The only comment I heard from a few people was right here, this piece right here. And the comment that they all had in different ways was, this doesn't sound like creating the future. it sounded, one person said angry, one person said blamey. And that was the only, what I tried to play with was, if we pull it out, does it do any harm? Does it still say the same thing if we delete that? And if so, do we delete it? And if not, that's okay. But that was really the only comment that I had that was in any way negative, or that was an I would change, and specifically it was, this doesn't sound like the compassion that we are used to hearing in creating the future, which just led me to say, well, is it necessary? So that's the only thing that I had.
I'm wondering if there's a way to maintain the content of saying this is, and I understand we want to focus on what we want to create, but is there a way to word those sentiments in a way that's compassionate? Is it possible to still preserve, the understanding of this is the reality that we're trying to change? And I think that's why that ended up there, is to recognize that this is part of the system that we're trying to transmute into something better, but we don't want to forget that this is kind of what we're working with. I think that's the reason why that ended up there. I think I was here when, I think, was it Vu who was kind of saying that needs to be included as part of the, in the values. So I'm wondering if there is a way to word that so it's not blaming, so it's not pointed or jackally, as we say in nonviolent communication.
Yeah, Kathy.
I had to remember I was on mute. I think just removing that portion where it says benefited white people, particularly white cis men, I think that we're not going to lose too much, because I think that it's implied. I don't think that you need to wag a finger at someone in order to make, in order to bring light on something, in order to show light on something. If we changed it to read, these conditions have systematically extracted power, wealth, labor, and resource from Black, Indigenous, communities of color, people with disabilities, LBGTQ plus people, and our planet as a whole. I think that still says what we want to say without wagging fingers. I don't. That's just where I'm coming from.
So I'll step in, because I shared a response with board members around this, and there were a couple of things for me. I am leaning strongly towards the side of leaving that in for a couple of reasons. One is, I was wondering why that actually felt blamey when it is simply a statement of the benefit side of all of the disadvantaged side that we named. We named all the people who were disadvantaged. We should name the class that is advantaged. So I think to me, and in that also, that I had framed sort of a broader question, which was, sometimes we don't always fully explain the current situation, to Eli's point, which is, we need to make a recognition to, in my opinion, to acknowledge that whatever adjustment we make doesn't misland again. When we start talking about that power and the disadvantage, I think we only tell half the story when we say who was disadvantaged. And if the people who are, I don't feel like, I'm going to be, I'm not going to say this graciously. But I don't feel like every class of individual that we're naming as disadvantaged feels blamed for being disadvantaged. So why should a white feel blamed for being named advantaged? by this. So that's sort of how I'm really coming to this, and I have to admit it's a really visceral feeling for me, being one of the white cis males and coming to my own terms of recognizing that the advantage that I see is not normal, not sustainable. And if we don't call it out as a white experience, then we're going to try and make it everybody's experience because we're going to think it's the norm, and it's not. It's a so I'll stop there, but that's sort of where I feel my tension was. And again, I had framed it. I said, there's nothing in the language objectively in my head that felt blaming. It was just a statement of an observation. So the blame or hurt or discomfort that someone was feeling, and I'm totally projecting, was coming from somewhere that I'm wondering what. Well, I know where it's coming from, but in my opinion, so I'll stop there.
I will share that there were 3 comments. 2 were white women, and 1 was a man, an Asian man.
I completely agree with what you said, Justin, but also I'm going to play devil's advocate a bit. But what about the white disadvantaged folks? I know they are not as many because, you know, we live in a society, yeah, whatever. But maybe there's, and I live this through, you know, the work that I do. Some people might feel like, you know, they, as white people, they also are disadvantaged in some areas or some regions. And that's always what leads me to think that at the end, you know, we are not talking about race, which I agree completely with what you said. I think that this sentence should be there, but at the same time, I'm just bringing another reasoning. But I always lead to think that at the end, this is not about race, it's about class, who has money and who doesn't.
Hi everyone, I just ate an entire bar of chocolate and I'm all worked up. This is not a good breakfast. I don't recommend it. I can see Beatrice and Kathy's point of view and Justin's. I tend to lean towards the side of calling things out immediately, because if we don't, then we just, it gets by omission. People are allowed to just avoid it. And right now, the entire sector is moving towards like not necessarily doing more good, but like doing less harm, calling on the people with power to do less harm. So like, for example, philanthropy has always gotten this free pass, which is like, oh, look, they're giving out money to help homeless kids or whatever. And now people are like, no, you just need to pay taxes. And that's it. We don't need you to do more good, just do less harm. And I think this is kind of the same principle as when we call out, you know, who is being benefited from things. Because if we don't call it out, then it's just going to be, people are just not going to recognize it. It's not going to be explicit. And I do think that this is going to affect how we recruit board members, because a lot of the younger board members in the sector, potential board members, are going to be more radical. And a lot of people of color are very tired of just like this constant talk about DEI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, etc. When the reality is, we don't need people of color to show up more. We need white folks in many ways to show up less in many areas, and to acknowledge the power that they hold and to give up stuff. And I'm rambling a little bit, but like sometimes I think just really, it's very frustrating for people to be like, well, you know, what should I do? Like for white CEOs, white cisgender CEOs, male CEOs especially, saying, well, we're doing this and this and this, and we're still not getting that diversity, and so what more do I need to do as a white CEO? And people don't want to say this, but what they're thinking is, we need you to step down as the white male CEO, like retire, do something else. And I know that's really hard. And even for me as a cisgender man of color, people are like, you know, Boo, why don't you apply for this, or why don't you run for office? And I'm like, I don't, because even as a man of color, I need to move aside to put, you know, to create room for women of color. especially. So I think for us, like the sector is moving towards really explicitly calling out who's benefiting and calling them on to give up power and privilege more than just acknowledging the damage that's being done to other folks.
So I'm curious, just kind of I guess a temperature read kind of question, which is, there was some of what was raised particularly about that piece was discomfort. And I guess for those who are here on the call, which doesn't fully acknowledge Vu's point of recruiting new people, but I guess it's just calling it right out. Are people uncomfortable with that language being there? Are people here in this space uncomfortable saying that, comfortably saying that, and feeling confident defending why it's there if we were called, again, that's our job is the integrity to not only check that the values are being applied, but also to be advocates and strong supporters of it. So I guess, because I think we could nuance around it, we could pick it, we could say disproportionately benefit white people to sort of, buffer it a little. But I guess the outright question is, are we satisfied with it and comfortable with it to the degree that we're, again, would be comfortable putting it out there and defending it and standing by it?
For me, I always go back to catalytic thinking. And when we have a binary question of should we or shouldn't we? Should we include it? Should we not include it? We always look at comparing apples to apples, either asking what's the worst that could happen if we keep it and what's the worst that could happen if we don't keep it, or asking the aspirational, what does it make possible if we keep it? What does it make possible if we don't keep it? And so, sort of going through, what is the worst that could happen if we keep that small phrase in there? And what is the worst that could happen if we don't keep that small phrase in there? But for me, those kinds of decisions are always made more clear by just asking the questions, the catalytic thinking questions. So what is the worst that could happen if we keep that in there?
People will be uncomfortable.
I think it's only specific people who be uncomfortable, and it may be those who haven't done the work or who are very early to what's happening all across. I feel like modern society, you can't turn anywhere without seeing some sort of like understanding of just this unjustness, and kind of knowing who makes the laws and is responsible for a lot of the framework itself. I think it's important that is acknowledged and felt. And yes, it might create discomfort, but also I think it starts dialogues and allows for, a testing of our current, attitudes and beliefs. And I think it's that's more of an upside than maybe the discomfort in having those conversations. Like Vu was saying, if it's not visible and clear, it might be not disregarded or not paid attention to.
Yeah.
I think one of the things, again, potential risks of it being there was the one that you named, Hildy, which is people might misassociate what that means and cast that, so that whole notion that somehow thinking this is not in alignment with catalytic thinking, or that this is counter to who we are, that's a reputational component that people could misinterpret what we mean. They could interpret creating the future as anti-white organization that's there. Again, I sort of, it's really coming off of Eli, what you were saying, which is, the sort of to put on the other column, what's the worst that happens if, so the worst that happens is we have to be able to articulate that more clearly and demonstrate that that's not actually true. We are not anti-white. We are not um, yeah, that it's not in opposition to catalytic thinking. Wow.
I may be about to say the wrong thing, but here you go. I think the worst that could happen is that we spend too much energy and time discussing one line in hundreds of lines, and it's valuable energy that we should be focusing elsewhere on taking forward our mission. So I am content with leaving it in, and I just counsel us that we could get bogged down in this.
So let's keep it in and go on to the next thing, perhaps.
I think one of the things that time will tell is the ongoing response we get from folks.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to offending some people. I think we kind of need to do that a little bit more. So, yeah.
Well, and I think to Carl's point, which is, because I think, Carl, your point is true on either side, that when it's not there, how much time are we going to have to spend talking about the fact that it's potentially missing and being in a defensive position? I think I sort of echo Vu, which is, let's be offensive in both ways, like meaning moving forward and potentially offending. Perhaps that's not the best, perhaps that's not within our values. But
Creating the future, we don't care if we offend you.
no. Okay. Well, it seems like just the ethos that I'm picking up on is that leaving it there certainly does not outweigh, or I don't know if I'm even going to say, let's leave it. I think that's
We will. Go ahead, Dimitri, I'm sorry.
This is a living document, and we are learning as we're going along. And this got added in because there was feedback. And there will be feedback throughout. We are trying to extract ourselves from something that is so pervasive that it is part of everything that we see, do, hear, say, whether we want it to be or not. So it's clearly going to be a birthing process where it's not going to necessarily be, just flip a switch and suddenly it's this. So I'm for leaving it and always keeping open mind toward, there may be language tweaks, there may be more that needs to be added to it. But I agree with Carl that we can move on, and I'm pleased with the fact that we're touching upon all of this.
And what we will do is add it to the current very long statement of our values in action as a preamble. And we will get that done before our next meeting. Kathy, you had something, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say I'm actually honestly a lot more comfortable that we want to keep it in than I was the other way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it actually raises something that, Vu, you both, Vu and Eli, touched on was, and I'm willing to take a look, and maybe others want to look, as we look at the actual values in action, maybe we want to say something about committing to fully naming the conditions, because I think that's what we're calling out here, is what we've all sort of been saying. What we're really doing here is trying to name, in this case, existing conditions, to acknowledge them, which we had previous conversations about, which was we need to acknowledge current conditions, even in the space of aspiring to a future that has a different set of conditions. But by not naming sort of what we're standing on right now, we do sort of put ourselves on quicksand in a way that maybe we don't need to.
I am seeing, given that our role as a board is to make sure that we're walking the talk of those values, which is why it's a statement of values in action. I am seeing us spending time on that body of what do those values look like in action. Over time, I can see us spending a lot of time digging through all of them as sort of an ongoing practice. It may just come up as we're doing stuff, It may get to the point where we say, you know what, we really need to dig into this. But yeah, I am feeling so good about this being a very intentionally alive document.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else related to the values before we move on? Sort of this notion of confirming that we are comfortable where they are.
One additional thought, just sort of around all of this, is that who does this attract to the organization? And in looking at the comment that you were talking about, Vu, is, I guess we've all talked about at some point or another, how do we get representation that is real in terms of what's going, the people that exist in the world? Well, this is certainly going to attract people that we may not have attracted before, because we are so clear in what we're stating. So again, in support of this, I think it opens up a whole avenue of folks in the world who can look at this and say, oh, they're speaking about me and my circumstance and my situation.
Great. Okay.
And just to quickly add to that, I had a friend who has a website, and it's like super long form copy, right? As opposed to what some say, make it really concise, really short, capture attention in the top of the page. And her site also says kind of what, this is who is not a good fit to work with me. So I think having this really thorough list of values is really important to like Dimitri was saying, to bring in the folks who really resonate and can add the most value and impact. So I think sometimes it's counterintuitive, to shorten versus to go really deep and wide into kind of what the ethos is. And I think that is exactly right. And it's definitely worth all of this discussion. So to Carl's point, I think it is important that, that this is crafted very intentionally, and continues to be crafted, which I think is a great point as well. So glad to be part of this. This is great.
Okay, so let's take a breath, settle in with where we are with our values. Unless there are any other sort of pressing concerns around the values and sort of where we're moving with them. I think, Hilda, you mentioned making the updates online to reflect that. I think, I don't know that we necessarily collectively acknowledge some of the additions that Kathy had recommended, but we did. I know that she had mentioned, speaking to the notion that we value the health of all people on the planet. So shifting that language on one of the bullets, and then actually, I think, Kathy, you did a nice job of delving into one of the places that we were going back and forth around collaboration and individualism. And you framed it as we value the collaborative work of many, as well as the contributions of individuals to those efforts. And so I don't know if folks are comfortable also with sort of those modifications to what we had landed on as an earlier draft. We could also incorporate those, Hildy.
You're muted.
Oops, I will do my best to do so. And if I misstate, I trust all of you to catch me.
We'll come back. So great. Okay, so a transition now, or I guess maybe walking into the house we just built, is thinking about the communication strategy. So Hildy, and perhaps maybe Hildy, you want to give a little bit of collective context for folks who were curious, but just as kind of a primer, since us as this board entity collectively, we are now practicing, going to try and practice the integrity role, which again, something we agreed to. This does not mean we are writing the strategy, nor necessarily getting deeply into the critique, but more asking the question of, does what we understand about how the strategy came to be and what it represents, does it actually, model what we say we value with it? I certainly think there's also room for, ideas, thoughts, reflections as we go in, but I want to really focus us on that primary goal first of practicing that integrity check that's there. So,
Yes, and
Hildy?
I am very excited to have both to have a strategy and to have our first concrete doing thing that the board is stepping into, saying, what are the questions we want to be asking to know if something is aligned with our integrity, and sort of feeling our way through that. The history of this strategy, and I've had conversations with many of you, and those whom I have not spoken with have been following enough to know that we are in a transition point at Creating the Future, stepping into what is next, which is immensely exciting. We have spent the first several of our years not realizing we were in proof of concept, but realizing now, looking back, it's always easier to look back at things, to know that we were teaching and helping folks bring catalytic thinking into the change they wanted to create. We were doing demonstration projects, which again were applying catalytic thinking to the change others wanted to create. And now looking at, okay, what's next? We no longer have to prove that catalytic thinking is effective in creating change. We have definitely proved that. And so it is really now stepping into, what experiments do we want to do? We've done those internally. This openness right here has been an experiment. So much of the work that we've done over the past several years of blowing up the board, blowing up the organizational structure, asking those different questions of what would we build, all of that was internally focused on our own experiments. Now going into the world to scale our mission to actually effect the change that we believe catalytic thinking has the ability to create in the world, and to support the social change arena, the social good arena, whether you call it nonprofit or social enterprise or government programs, it doesn't really matter, to align the way change is organized and organizations run with the world that we want to see, and realizing how often that does not walk the talk, that the way we do the work goes counter to and frequently perpetuates the problems. And so as we were stepping into that, realizing that you can do proof of concept being cute and lean and mean as we have been over time, an all-volunteer organization, those working for wages, working for stipend wages at best. You can do that in proof of concept. It's not comfortable, but you can do it. It is near to impossible if you want to create the kinds of a growth of the ripples of our mission that we're looking to. And so before we could step out into the world and grow in that way, we knew that we needed to be more communicative about what Creating the Future is about, what our work is about, what our intentions are, and our track record, and this beautiful core of stories that we have of change that we have actually seen happen. And so it has been probably going on 2 years, certainly a year and a half, that we began having the conversations about the strategy, going through catalytic thinking. What would good look like? Who, first and foremost, who will hear the messages we put out in the world if we are more intentional about everything from social media to regular media to blogging to our journal to all of that? Who will hear those messages, whether they are the quote target audience or not? And the beauty of catalytic thinking is that that's the first question that we ask. is not who is the target audience and making us narrow our focus immediately, but broadening that focus immediately to say, people are going to be affected by this, whether they are the target or not. And so what do we want to make possible for those who will hear those messages? And we spent several meetings. They were all online. We had, I'm going to guess, around 20 people between I think there were 4 meetings. It was back in 2019, in the good old days of 2019, before life went to hell in a handbasket. Yeah, so we had several wonderful, energizing meetings. I know several of you were in those meetings, and from there, we had intended to just dive in at the beginning of 2020, but from what I can see on my calendar, there was no beginning of 2020, and because in my mind, we're just skipping right to 2021. We're going right past it. And so mid-year, we started to sort of jam up again. All along, I've been keeping my eyes out for who was excited about this, who wanted to continue to play, who wanted to play in a, I want to be part of it, who wanted to play in a, do you need help and we'll step in and guide, and very excited that Peter Panapento, whom I had worked with at the Chronicle 10 years ago when I had my podcast, was very excited. Not just, and this to me is a litmus test. And you know, we're talking about foundations and how foundations will change things. And Carl, I am so excited about the foundation you're starting. I mean, like, we need to talk. It's very exciting. Looking for, as we're looking for funding, we want to work with foundations who want to apply catalytic thinking in their own work. So we don't want to just have a quote silent financial partner, but someone who is, we always want our partners to be real partners and thought partners. And what excited me about Peter and his partner, Scott, is that they wanted to apply catalytic thinking to the way they do communications work. Not just with us, but with all of their clients. And these are people who've been in this work for decades. And that's always exciting to me when a group isn't, because I will share with you that we had several people involved in those strategy conversations who, trying to think of the nice way to say it, were made uncomfortable. And it seems to be our word, the medical discomfort. We're made uncomfortable by the questions we were asking and kept trying to steer the conversation back to, that's not how you do it. And those people also offered, oh, we would love to be, love to help with that. You hire us, we would love to help with that. And the only folks that we would even talk with are folks who were, wow, we could apply this to the work we're doing with all our other clients. It's like, okay. And so over the several months, I worked with Peter and with Scott to draft this strategy. And the strategy really is intended to be, and for shorthand, top down and bottom up. Is regular people knowing that they can create systems change, knowing that catalytic thinking can help them do it, providing that information to them, and top down, the same with influencers, whether that's foundations, whether that's people who have huge blog followings, Lule, others. Yeah, so just really looking at it, and the thing that was exciting about what came out of the initial strategy conversations that led to this document, those hours and hours of conversation, is that this is not promoting creating the future. This is sharing catalytic thinking with the world. So, and that to me was a really big difference, that this is not a PR plan for creating the future. But this is a communications strategy that shares catalytic thinking with the world. And that came out of the 8 hours of online conversation with groups and the ongoing conversation that came out of that, is that the importance of, and it's been made more important this year. Everyone wants to know, how do we create a future different from our past? There is an acknowledgement that going back to normal would kill us. That normal is what got us in this situation in the first place in many cases. And that we need to figure out how to create a future different from our past. And oh, by the way, that's not only our name, but that is what catalytic thinking does. And so that's what's exciting to me about this, is that this is not about promoting creating the future. This is about, and in some cases it won't be, it'll just be about catalytic thinking. And not saying, and you can go to creating the future for more, but no, it'll just be so that folks know that there is a way, there is a path to creating a different future. So that's my immensely long preamble.
So, Hildy, let me just ask you, is there a particular question that you sort of add in this, or do you want to just sort of shift to that question of, hey, everybody, taking a look at what was shared, what Hildy shared, and what, for those of you who may have had a chance to actually look through the document, are there things that come up again in that realm of really, is this not that we're promoting creating the future, but is this creating the future? Is this representative of what we are putting forward, want to put forward, our understanding of a process that this kind of organization would be engaged in?
In my mind, Justin, this particular document is less important than our having a routine set of questions that we want answered about anything that comes up. So because with the growth that we're anticipating over even the next 6 months, there's going to be, and I put it in the blog post when I wrote it, there's going to be so many practical questions coming up. What do our values in action look like when it comes to compensation? What do our values in action look like when it comes to contracting with folks? What do our values in action look like? With, I mean, just go down the list of all of the stuff that's going to be coming up in the next several months as we grow. What do our values look like when we do a collective enoughness campaign? What does it look like when we are working with funders? I mean, it just go down. And so to me, the more important question is what are the questions that we're going to want to answer? And then what will it take to be able to answer those? So will they be questions that are posed to whomever is doing work to make sure we have a checklist that we can go by, which is awesome. I mean, you know, what will the process look like? What will the system look like? And for me, I just thought it would be easiest to figure that out. It's really easy to get lost in the intellectualizing and the theorizing of what it might be, and we could ask this, and you're like, but if you got something concrete, suddenly the questions arise. And so I thought it would be helpful that we just dive in on that. But really, no surprise to no one, I'm more curious about the questions than the answers.
Okay, so questioners here. What questions do you feel like you would need answers to acknowledge that this is in alignment with the values and process strategy of catalytic thinking and creating the future?
I think that you already said both of them and what you just said, that do they align with the values that we've just established? That would be like number one. And then I guess number two would be around, if there needs to be a number two, it would be around, you know, was the catalytic thinking process, you know, used as part of the process of coming to this, I guess. Those would be the two things that I would maybe want to know.
How would we know if it's aligned with our values?
Yeah, maybe that's where the board comes in to be helping think about that. I know, I don't know if we'll go to this, but I know when I was reading through the document, there were a couple of things that came up for me where I thought, oh, I wonder, those seem like they might not not line up with some of our values as well as could be. So, you know, maybe the board's role as an integrity board is helping to reflect on that, or not, but maybe somebody needs to do that, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess what I was asking is, as a board, how will we know if it aligns with our values? I mean, and I think I'm being real serious when I say this. I think that there is huge value in gut check. So I think that someplace in our board checklist is, does it feel right, or do we feel like something's off, or do we? So really acknowledging, Angie, that looking through it and saying, this may not feel right. I gut check is really important.
So, first of all, my gut check on this is that actually it's a fine piece of writing, and actually I thought it had a clarity and and I guess a sort of, you know, a logic to it in terms of change that I think is really good. My second thought about it was that you could, though, argue when you get to the very end of the document and it talks about primary media targets as emblematic of our approach, is that essentially you're just sustaining the existing approaches by doing it in that way. You know, by going to the existing top-down sort of influencing organizations rather than building a grassroots community from the ground up. So, for example, whoever is behind the Sunrise Movement, and I'm sorry I can't remember their names, did they start off with a list of what are the most influential sort of climate change journals available? No, they didn't. They just went out and they built a movement. Right. So I mean, trying to be critical of it, it might be talking the talk but not walking the walk, sort of whole thing. My other thing that I guess I felt a bit nervous about it, because I do think it's a fine piece of writing, is if we went out and started telling all our story, can we then follow up with really concrete examples and so on of what our change model looks like in practice? Because there's a danger that, you know, we sort of go out and we say, hey, you know, like we've got this fantastic new thing that's going to replace the petrol engine. We've got this fantastic new electric vehicle, and then the response is, well, show me the vehicle. And have we got that yet?
Oh yeah, we've got almost a decade of it. Yeah, that's why that's what's exciting, is telling the story. Yeah.
Would the diaper bank be one of those stories, Hildy? One of the really like clear and fantastic ones. It's my favorite. Are they documented? Is there like a repository of stories that, to Carl's point, we can review and tap into as we talk about this to others?
That's one of the exciting parts for me personally, is that this process will elicit those, because most of those currently exist in my head. A big part of what's next for creating the future is the very necessary step of what I've always talked about as replacing founders with systems, because founders frequently have all of that stuff in their heads, and something happens to the founder or not. That's not how change happens if it's all in one person's head. And what's happened over time is that All of those stories are, you know, oh yeah, I've got that. It's somewhere in my email. That doesn't count. So a big part of what the effort will be over the coming months is to both me finding those stories, but more importantly, eliciting those stories from folks. I mean, as an example, the article that was in Stanford Social Innovation Review this past summer about catalytic thinking included, I believe, 3 stories. One of them, I think, was the diaper banking lie, but because it's such an easy one on collective enoughness. But there's so many on collective enoughness that are so wonderful. I learned many of them, Beatrice, when I was in Florida. The Patterson Foundation is just all over collective enoughness. Justin shared a story that was included in that article, and Karen Smith shared a story that was included in that article. And so a big piece of it is going to be getting those stories documented and out into the world. One of the other things that's coming out of this, again, that will walk the talk, to me, a big question is not just does the strategy itself walk the talk, but all of the activities that will come out of that strategy, will they walk the talk? So when you've got something this big and all-encompassing, for example, changes will be made to our e-journal. Currently, it is just A, it comes out when we have time to bring it out, and B, it is almost universally exercises folks can do, very discrete exercises in catalytic thinking that they can put a toe in the water. We're thinking about maybe sharing stories in that e-journal. We're thinking about making announcements or doing whatever. And instead of saying, okay, well, that's what we'll do, we're going out to the world and saying, we're going to have conversations. We've scheduled a conversation for January 7th. If you are a reader of the e-journal, please come join us. Tell us, what do you like? What do you not like? If we change, what would you like to see more of? So again, using catalytic thinking at every point along the way, rather than saying, okay, we created the strategy, now we'll just go do. No, how, what will it take to make sure that we are consistent in applying catalytic thinking and applying our values to each of the pieces that come up during that?
So I think kind of going back to that question, so I'm going to share my screen because I was going back to the values document. We have these 7 bullets. And I was actually just going through and asking myself, okay, when I read through this and heard what you said, Hildy, I mean, I could almost imagine even a matrix, just going across and saying, was it visionary? Was it systemic change in terms of how we were thinking about doing it, as opposed to incremental? And I think, Carl, you touched on that. You sort of called the question the media strategy. Was that just incremental or bold enough for us? Was it risk-taking, inquiry, sense-making? Again, I just sort of go through this list. One thing I was thinking when it says here, we value centering the voices and agency of those who are most impacted by injustices, it really makes me think about who's telling those stories that we're using. So it was one thing for me to tell the story of the organization I worked with, but that organization works with immigrant communities and experiences. The people who can really speak to what happened in that organization are actually the people being served by that organization, or at least the staff members who are implementing the ideas that came out of a catalytic thinking process. So that's one thing that I would push into this communication, is that when we think about who gets to tell the story about the catalytic thinking success, that it's not just the EDs or the consultants or the facilitators who get to tell it, but actually those who experienced it.
Yes.
There's the last value bullet is missing from that document that you have, Justin.
Oh.
It's the collective enoughness one. I remember we added it, but it maybe didn't make it onto the document.
Well, let me
Isn't it
see.
lost?
I just added it to that Google Doc. But
How-
I guess we have different documents. We need to make sure we have whatever the final one is. But I wanted to just add that I think doing that as a board can make sense, but also it needs to be probably, right, I mean, other people beyond the board that do that kind of value check as well. But maybe the board could be a first gut check part of it, right, before it gets sent out to everybody else or something like that. So a little bit of a kind of focus group.
Anecdotally, one of the things that has been most both gratifying and surprising is the number of people who've been affected by catalytic thinking, who've implemented catalytic thinking, who've made it part of their practice, be it organizationally or personally, that we have no clue have done that. And that the thing that excites me about having a larger voice in the world, whatever that means, a marketing strategy, newsletters, whatever, is that those become known. And to the point that you're making, Angie, in terms of who speaks and who relays this story, we don't even know who they are to relay this story. And so I'm excited about the potential here for, Hildy said, this has been a 10-year experiment. It's actually longer than that if you go back to the diaper bank in collective enoughness days. But so who has been affected by it? And we so frequently run into people who say, oh my God, I came across this in 1927, and it has been the most amazing thing in my grandchildren's life. I mean, I'm being facetious here, but that is practically what happens very, very often. And I'm looking forward to it being even more as the awareness that we want those stories is made public.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts are occurring to me. And one, I just want to mention, Carl, that the media part is the top-down part, but really acknowledging that this must be, if this is about bringing catalytic thinking, bringing a thought frame, bringing to the world a thought framework that can help create a compassionate, humane future. If that's the purpose of doing this strategy, and showing people you can change the systems you find yourself in, that has to be simultaneously top down and bottom up. It has to be simultaneously grassroots and changing the people who, very, very concrete example. You change the grassroots. You change the way many people are thinking about resourcing, let's say, for instance, and saying this is a system that needs to change. If we don't simultaneously talk to the folks who are creating the grant applications, requiring all the BS that goes with getting their precious dollars, if we don't change them, then nothing changes. But if we change them and don't also help people understand how within your own organization you can be asking completely different questions that will affect change without your foundations, that you can do it right now. You are just a lowly level 3 program person.
Yeah.
But you can create change with the way you're asking questions. Right there, you can. We have to do both. And that's that. So I wanted to just be clear that this is not just, the media strategy was just, it's actually not even a strategy, it's a tactic. It's who are some examples of people we might talk to? But it absolutely has to be both. I absolutely agree, Carl. The other question that I then have is really coming to the granular of, and I love the idea of a matrix, Justin. Of looking at the values and having a matrix. There's process-wise, and I'm just thinking out loud, so I'm spitballing and my brain is, I hope you guys can't smell the wood burning. It's almost as if before we tackle a particular issue. So whether it's communication strategy or employee compensation, that we look at the values and say, okay, when it comes to employee conversation, what will value number 1 look like? What will we see? What will we hear? What would good look like for value number 1 when it comes to employee compensation? What will good look like for value number 2 when it comes to employee compensation? There's something in there process-wise where I'm thinking that it may not be universal across all topics that the board has the questions, but it'll be those kinds of questions that we go through the values. And again, I'm going process here. We go through the values one by one and ask, when it comes to X action, what will that look like? What would good look like for, and let me just flip to the values. We value decision-making by the people affected by any decision. We value centering the voices and agency of those who are most impacted by injustices. Okay, what would those look like when it comes to employee compensation? We value building upon social movements and other efforts that have successfully created systemic change. What would that look like when it comes to employee compensation? So I'm just thinking about what are the questions that we want to be routinely asking, and what is the process that we want to be using, and then applying that to this particular thing.
That makes me wonder if we need a value bullet point that's about the catalytic thinking process itself. Like, we value that as a process for decision making, because how does that end up, like, because we could do what you were just saying, Hildy, without actually using catalytic thinking framework at this point, it seems like. So that's just one question that's raised, that is raised for me in what you were just saying.
Well, and I think I would want to temper us going too far around exploring each of these, because I lean towards, even like in this example, is each of us looking at these 8 bullets and thinking about that document and what we understand, and just ask ourselves. And you know, this is sort of the gut check, rather than trying to prescribe. I mean, the questions are there. They're already there. And I really am resonating with point 4, which says we value decision-making by the people affected by any decision. So we shouldn't necessarily be framing all of the questions around employee compensation, because we are not necessarily I mean, we have to give support to it, but at the same time, who's going to be actually engaged in that employee relationship, and who are the employees? And what I want to be able to do is come back and say, you know, yes, in many of those instances right now, it is a lot of you, Hildy and Dimitri, and sometimes some other key volunteers. What I just want to know is, was the voice of who's going to be impacted by a salary compensation heard? I know what my voice is, but again, I'm up here at the top. That's not the bottom up. And so I am a little bit more inclined to really think about this as the framing of as things come up, rather than trying to necessarily preemptively structure them, to allow it to come up and say, whoever is involved in figuring out that mechanical, I'll call it the mechanical piece, we want to make sure that you're looking at these 8 bullets, maybe +1 to Angie's point around the catalytic thinking, because as a board, whatever the board entity is, and even if we have just sort of this, you know, the minimal board with, much like what we have here, which is voices of support that can help inform this, I feel like the space we want to be in is, hey, what does it look like against these 8, and is there something that's missing? So rather than doing all of the deliberation around each of these 8, we're sort of reflecting back on, is it demonstrated? Is it modeled? Is there a place where we feel we're ill-informed to be able to say whether that's been addressed, in which case we defer if we feel comfortable deferring, because that's where the decision. So, because I feel like we could overburden ourselves trying to think through every organizational system, organizational strategy at the board level.
What comes to mind for me is my partner Stephanie talking about how the entire organization is being trained about trauma so that it's a trauma-informed organization. So it's that systematic thing where if we understand where everyone who's been impacted by trauma in some way, everyone in the organization will have the chance to then, not necessarily have to have a rubric of rules, but understand and empathize with that person that they're dealing with at whatever level of interaction. Literally everybody in the org, CEO down to the folks on the ground, are being trained in this. And I thought that was really brilliant because everybody has trauma at some level. So I think in this same way, if these values, and I love how Hildy said, it's not about creating the future, it's about a way of thinking about systems change. That, if people are aware of this, then it kind of becomes part of their DNA. Like these days, I'm somebody who takes notes religiously to the point that if I go to a meeting, I feel, if I'm lacking my digital notepad here, like I'm not prepared. So I think, it's really about the way of approaching the thing in mind, and it is going to be a long-term thing because it's going to take a long time for folks to drop their models of how to solve problems. So I think, this is definitely going to take that trickle down or trickle up. The two-sided approach is the way it's going to really expand exponentially because each person becomes a candle that lights other candles.
By the way, that's awesome that you all are working on trauma issues. I mean, that's tremendous.
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah, it brings back to, and again, I'm just looking at board process. I'm looking at where are we 2 years from now as a board, 3 years from now as a board, and looking at your comments, Eli and Justin. It raises things like what does the board want to look at? Does the board want to look at every strategy the organization is coming up with? Does the board want to look at, does compensation, should the board be looking at compensation? Most people who are not at Creating the Future would say, absolutely, that is the board's role, is to look at and approve compensation. And the board's role is to look at and approve the budget. The board's role is to, so given and we said early on when it came to integrity that we wanted to make sure that we were not only walking the talk of our values, but meeting the expectations of the people whom are out in our community. So it sort of raises the question of what, and again, process. That's all I'm thinking about right now is process. What does the board want to consider? And what are the questions the board wants to consider when it comes to those items? Is it the difference between 60,000 a year and 130,000 a year? Is it the difference between the CEO? Well, we won't have a CEO. The program coordinator gets $2 million, and the person scheduling and taking care of and making sure that the coordinator can do everything that he or she can do gets $12 an hour. Or those kinds of questions. What's too much? What's too little? Is there a level playing field? Does everybody get paid the same at Creating the Future? Which is a concept that has intrigued the life out of me for a long time. That everyone it makes the same, because if we see ourselves all as essential workers, and we want to model what it looks like to stop waving the flag at essential workers and just pay them, what does that look like internally for us? Those are the sorts of policy conversations that, you know, how many of those do we want to have as a board conversation? And again, how do we know that we're walking the talk as we're having those conversations? This is huge stuff, guys. And
It seems to me like, I mean, there are so many things, but if we've had our values discussion and we've agreed to some values. Now we have this strategy around communications as a way to, if we as a group sort of have a sort of discussion, assessment, whatever you want to say around that helps us to also think about, are our values the right ones as we start to apply them. Having that back and forth iterative process, I think it's very helpful, at least for the early days, and maybe at some point we get so comfortable with that and the process that we use for decision making is really instituted that we don't have to have like checks on everything, but actually doing it a few times, to see how it feels and what it happens might be very useful to all of us.
My sense,
go ahead.
yeah. So my sense as ever is that I think we have to get the balance right between asking ourselves questions and making sure that we advance in the spirit of how we want to operate with actually moving ahead. I think, those are perfectly reasonable questions around salaries and like what's the role of the board in sort of big questions like that. I mean, there will be, so you talked about Baobab Foundation before. So one of the processes that we are going through at the moment is about our values and who are we prepared to take money from. So and if we are ultimately against sort of decolonizing sort of philanthropy and so on, what happens when we are faced by a foundation or something like that that accrued its wealth from the slave trade or something like that, of which any number of organizations in Britain did? Do we take money from them because the ethical judgment is that you can now start to correct some of that wrong by taking the money and applying it to communities now, or is actually the correct and ethical thing to do to refuse the money and so on? So I think there are absolutely things that we can point to in terms of where we will want, and for me, I mean, the names on the tin in terms of sort of values and the role of the board here is that we are going to want to ask questions which ultimately are about the sort of the direction and the ethicals and values position that the organization takes, much more so than is $60,000 the correct figure in the current market and that sort of stuff. And I think we'll know those situations when we arrive at them. So let's not get too bogged down in trying to foresee all the eventualities and all the questions. We're doing something interesting here. I think we've made real progress with the value statement. I think we've made real progress with the communication statement. As you can probably tell, I'm sort of itching to sort of say, right, okay, they're good enough. Now, can we move on to the next thing, please?
I agree with Carl, especially because he said it in a British accent, which made it sound very convincing and sophisticated. If we're gonna build a house while we live in it, then I think we would need to figure out all the designs in the house and where each room is and what we'll live in with where. And then I'm also itching for some action and to really get this out more into the sector.
So I am curious, is there a plan? Is there a next step, a core first step, or will it be birthed right here in this group? Is there a framework already on some of the next things that will be happening?
Next things as a board are going to be just as things are coming up. And as the person who is primarily these days spearheading what's next, and having, I was realizing I was started kicking myself during Awesomes that I was in the middle of having conversations, initial sleuthing conversations, investigatory conversations during our last board meeting. In the 6 weeks between October 1st and the middle of November, I had 40 conversations, anywhere between an hour and a half. One-on-one, just here's what we're thinking about, sharing. Many of you were part of those conversations. I'm deeply, deeply grateful. Just really looking at what is next as we dive into what we're seeing as a big project, which is looking at the systems change arena, period. And again, as I mentioned earlier, you know, does the way social change groups in general, whether you're talking about all of the infrastructure, does that align with the future we want to see? Does the way boards work right now align with the future we want to see? Or does it go counter to and perpetuate all of the stuff that comes out of a colonial, capitalist, patriarchal society? Oh yeah, by the way, it does. Does organizational structure? Does the way we evaluate? Does the fact that the reason we evaluate is because somebody's making us because they've got the money? Just going through every one of those structures and advocating for and creating a space for experimenting with, because that's what creating the future is so much, is a space for experimenting, applying catalytic thinking and experimenting. That's what we really see as a big next step. Sharing what we have learned, sharing our education programs much more widely so that people don't have to come to Creating the Future to learn. They can learn at their local nonprofit resource center. They can learn from a consultant. They can learn anyone. So there's a lot of distributing and sharing and rippling out and scaling what we have done so far as next steps. The immediate next steps in that are going to include a lot of doing stuff that the board is probably going to want to take a look at. And it is going to be compensation, and it is going to be recruitment, and it's going to be recruitment of new board members and potentially new partners. And there's going to be a lot of fundraising involved, a lot of different thinking about fundraising involved. And all of those things are going to be things that the board is going to want to know. Are we walking the talk of our values when we're fundraising? Are we walking, or are we, you know, Carl, my favorite expression, and I learned this about 20 years ago in the olden days of listservs of Charity Channel that you and I were in the olden days. I learned the expression, there is no money so dirty that it cannot be laundered by the tears of widows and orphans. So you can keep that one in your hat. You know, is that going to be our fundraising approach? Or, you know, so I mean, that's a values statement. So again, Eli, in terms of what's next, we're fairly concrete in a big picture way of what we're stepping into, and we know that stepping into it is going to be lots of moving parts. Many of which the board is going to want to weigh in on. I mean, to me, the issue of compensation is huge, because we have the chance to model some stuff and experiment with some stuff that I think sorely needs to be. One of the things I noticed in our values also, I didn't see the word equity, and I may have missed it. But I didn't see the word equity, and I'm thinking very specifically of equity of opportunity and economic equity. So I'm, and I love the fact that we're talking about this as emergent, the values as emergent, because that's becoming very clear in some of the things that we're thinking about now. If we're talking about compensation, are we talking about economic equity? Oh, okay. So you know, as you mentioned, Angie, that it's going to change things. That this is what the values look like at 10 minutes to the end of the meeting on the 14th of December, but they may not look like that on the 15th.
So I have it's sort of a reflection, and it's somewhat a response to Eli, your question too, of sort of next steps. I want to go back to, you know, one of the things we were very cautious about was that the board was as little a decision-making body as possible, because it rarely will encompass those who are most affected by a decision. Even the compensation one, while I have lots of opinions about what equitable compensation is, I would want a process that someone who's more connected with what equitable compensation plans look like, actually making a determination. And us not trying to reframe that or, construct it, but to really be responsive to it, to validate as well as to learn from it. I mean, I think that's one of the developmental opportunities we have as board members, which is to say, how does this plan actually deal with that? Is there something, because that's what's going to affirm for me that it's in alignment with the value that we hold as an organization. So I mean, in some ways it is speaking to Carl, what you said, which is, I want to just let things roll. They shouldn't have to wait for us to frame anything. It should be go out, have that, again, sort of my thought, and I hadn't done it beforehand, but I want to go back, is read this plan that was presented and shared with us as a strategy through the eye line of those 8 or now 9 potential bullets, and just see, are there questions that came up for me? And if there aren't, if I feel affirmed, we've done the integrity job in many ways, that we don't have to really go deep in, because that's where we're going to tie ourselves up in knots, and tie you up in knots right now. Hopefully there will be more entities out there starting to do the work that really what we are doing is just asking that question. Does the work, we're not actually evaluating the work, because we're not in the position, like that's the false premise of boards. I'm in no position to be able to evaluate what a fair compensation system is. All I can do is say, did the right people who know what that looks like contribute to that? And I'm also thinking about that in relationship to that other question, which is, what is it that we want the experience of a potential board member to be? And I'll be honest, most boards are overwhelming for people. What we ask them to do, think about, try and figure out, learn about, is too much. There's too much power in the hands of stupid people. And I don't mean that they're stupid. I just mean they're stupid about the thing that they're being asked to make decisions and be powerful around. And again, I felt like we were really pushing against that, to say, that's not what we want to be. We don't want to replicate that. And I think we're really close, and I just don't want us to slide back into having to prescribe again questions, frameworks, tools, when we're really on the cusp of these gut questions, and certainly being able to have interesting conversations, but also being able to sort of look at communications, plan, strategy looks great. If there are implications that any one of us are particularly interested in or curious about, there's another opportunity to be engaged with that. So that was really kind of more my reflection. That's sort of,
well, it's probably time for reflections anyway, so we can dive in and have people take a deep breath. And this has been a big, hairy, intense conversation, 2 big, intense conversations, intermelded. If you took any notes and something stands out and you want to circle that and just share what is standing out to you as we are leaving this conversation today. I'm reflecting on your reflection, Justin. It's part of the reason I love sharing reflections, is we get to think off each other's thinking. Something came up with Dimitri and me planning for something very, very small and granular that had to happen for this meeting. And there was something really delightful and juicy to be able to say, all right, well, how does it fit with our values? What would our values have us do? Like that. And to me, the value is not, and it became very clear when you were talking, Justin, that, and what I'm doing here is pointing to you. So in my screen, you're right here. What became very clear is that this is not about the role of the board, it's about the role of all of us. You know, Eli, you talking about the trauma training throughout the whole organization. This is about inculcating the values into absolutely every question that we are all asking all the time of ourselves. And when and if something actually gets to the board, it becomes the same question that we will all have been asking. Does this fit with our values? Where in our values does this feel like a disconnect? Chances are, if something feels like it's off, it's going to be off from our values. And that if that becomes the routine of how we're creating anything and creating the future, that's the questions we're asking. How does it fit with our values? Yeah, that's huge.
So there's a study in the UK about childcare, and what happens when parents are late arriving to pick up their children from childcare. So in this study, the nursery started charging parents if they were late, because the additional costs of like them for the childcare people. And they thought that was the way to stop the parents from showing up late. It did the opposite effect to what they intended. More parents started showing up late because the incentive and the market mechanism just sort of turned it into from a relationship to a transaction, and it turned it from a discussion about values and what's the right thing to instead being a conversation about, well, this is just a financial transaction. So I use that because I think we've demonstrated in our conversation today that we've done the right thing and that the value statements work, and that we've started to have a conversation about our communications function, and that it is using values, it seems to me, that is a far more effective way of driving people's behavior and shaping what we want than anything that's about incentives or mechanisms or rules or regulations. It's about appealing to what people think is the right thing. Okay, so I think we're doing the right thing. Okay. Having said that, I think we've now kicked the values around a bit, and I think they're good enough, and I think we need to move on from them. I think we've got a comms strategy that is really well written, and again, that should also be a living document that we can come back to. So I look on the last couple of hours with a real sense of satisfaction that we've made progress, whilst also thinking, right now, let's move on.
Any other reflections? What is standing out to each of you? Don't make me call on you.
Just that I appreciate Carl's position, but I also want to, I also think that we can be learning as we go along. So if we've discovered there's a few things missing, we should be open to adding those as we go along. And also, I do have some feedback on the strategy. I think it looks great, but I have a couple of questions that were raised for me, but maybe I'll email everybody just when I was thinking about them in relation to values later. But thank you, everyone.
I think I need Vu's massage chair. That's mine.
One for everybody. Merry Christmas, guys.
It's like $200, and I got it on Black Friday for 25% off, so it was a good deal. Yeah, I agree. I agree with Carl. Not just because of the British accent, which is very charismatic. I think I agree, and I think there's certain things we can do. For example, we could collaborate, Nonprofit AF and Creating the Future, to have some sort of like webinar or something, because I would love to see these ideas being spread out, and we've been meta for quite a bit. And I think it'll be helpful just to like get this out to folks and just get them to start applying. And there's also a few things we can learn from the community-centric fundraising movement, which in many ways was influenced by Creating the Future. It has a Slack channel, and people are experimenting across the US. There's different groups doing things. I think there are things we can learn and do and collaborate together. So I'm looking forward to that in 2021.
Could you put that in the chat, Vu, that community fundraising link to that, so I can look it up later? And I got to jump, but I want to say that this has been an incredible experience. I've taken so many notes, and I agree with Carl. It feels solid. It feels very thorough. And the best way, as with building new companies, is to just put it in the market and see what happens and iterate quickly. learn from mistakes and failures and ideas for improvement. So I'm very excited to see what the next steps look like as far as getting this out. Fundraising, like you said, Hildy, that's the energy, money. I see it as energy that fuels things, either for good or for bad. So I think that's going to be exciting to see how we create a framework internally for that, and then of course, circulate the ideas and put them out to the world at large. So very grateful to be included in this, powerhouse of amazing thinkers. Excited to see what comes forward. Thank you for having me.
So grateful you're here, Eli. So grateful.
One of the things that I wrote down on my notes that it's resonating a lot, and I would like to share is what you were saying about the communications plan, Hildy, that it is not about creating a promotion plan for creating the future, but about the communications plan for catalytic thinking and bringing that to the world. That is what really excites me about the work that Creating the Future is doing. They're creating a compassionate human world. I think that, this year especially, like, we've been hit in so many ways that it has made me lose hope in many occasions and being defeated. But with conversations like this and knowing that there's people like you guys out there, I'm feeling hopeful, and I'm glad that this has been like that push that Creating the Future also needed to say it is our time. So thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation.
I just want to say that I agree with everyone. I really think that any planning that we try to make we've seen firsthand over the last year how, regardless of how much we've planned, things can take a dramatic turn away from any ideas we can come up with. I think that as long as we stay true to our values, and making too much structure in anything kind of opposes the value. I mean, it goes back to the idea of the difference between an organization and a movement. So I think I'm with Carl and I'm with Justin and Angie with the idea that we can just move forward if we've got missing items and things like that we can go ahead and put in. But I also wanted to say thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this. This has been amazing. I'm very grateful for all of you.
Thank you for joining us, Kathy and Beatrice.
Did you pipe in on you?
Hildy and I were having a discussion about an old article that she has out in the world on the difference between a movement and an organization. And I'm reflecting in everything we talked about today with that lens, that a movement is based on values. That's what it's, and it is constantly shifting, but based on those values in terms of what happens. And that's really what we've been talking about. A movement also is collaborative. It can't succeed without that. An organization is competitive. It succeeds by singularly being itself and others not doing the same thing. Movements share. Organizations may not, just depending on what they're structured. So I'm just excited by how all of this is coming together. And now that I've been looking at, not now, but I'm looking at it through that lens, it makes so much sense. It's so clear. I also wanted to very quickly say that, Beatrice, I love your accent. Now that Carl's out of the room. Now that he's out of here. I want to say that. And also, I'm just honored by you and Kathy and Eli joining us today. It is just, that's what makes this so wonderful, is having those additional voices and new perspectives, that new views on what's happening.
I have one more reflection. Andy, you reflected, didn't you? Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. I have one more reflection, having listened to everyone, and it's it is the value of our opening our doors and inviting, just come on in, just come sit with us. We want to hear what you have to say. Eli and Beatrice and Kathy, so honored and grateful for not just your being here, but your being present and participating and feeling like this is a place where you could. And I just want to mention an observation that has me smiling, and that is in these reflections, all three of you talked about we. None of you said, here's what you all need to do. All three of you talked about we, and that just, that's why we do what we do. It's why we open the doors. It is why we embrace whoever wants to come in. And just hearing that one word, it's bringing tears to my eyes. So I just want to thank you all for being part of this bigger we, and that's our whole goal in this communications thing, is just make the we bigger. So thank you all. Justin, thank you for facilitating today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks,
Justin.
everyone. Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy
Since
New
we
Year.
won't.
Hey, we have got, what, 16 days and this damn year is over.
Yes.
About time.
Thank you all.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.